There is a road in central Pennsylvania where the asphalt is cracked in long, jagged seams, and the cracks breathe. Not metaphorically, the ground exhales. Sulfur and carbon monoxide rise through the fractures in pale wisps that vanish against the sky. And if you press your hand to the surface on a January morning, when the air temperature is 14 degrees, the road is warm. There is a sign at the edge of this road, green metal, white reflective letters. It says Centralia. Below it, in smaller print, the population figure has been updated exactly once since 1981. The current number is 0, but the ground is still warm. This is not a ghost story. Blackwell does not deal in ghost stories. This is a budget report. It is the story of a fire that has been burning underground for 62 years, and the exposed arithmetic behind the decision to let an entire town die, rather than admit that every agency, every level of government, every contractor, and every consultant involved had failed to do the one thing that mattered, which was put out a match. The match was lit on May 27, 1962, but Centralia did not begin that day. To understand what the fire consumed, you have to understand what was there to burn. Centralia sits in Columbia County, in the anthracite coal region of eastern Pennsylvania. Anthracite is the hardest, densest, most carbon-rich form of coal on Earth. It burns hotter and longer than any other variety. The veins beneath Centralia had been mined since the 1850s. By the early 20th century, the entire town existed because of those veins. Every paycheck, every storefront, every church pew was underwritten by the coal beneath the streets. At its peak, Centralia was home to roughly 2,000 people. By 1962, that number had declined to about 1,100. The mines were mostly closed. The deep shafts had been abandoned. But the coal was still there, miles of it, hundreds of millions of tons, threaded through the earth in seams and veins and pockets that connected to one another through a labyrinth of tunnels that no single map had ever fully documented. The town sat on top of all of it, and below the town, below the basements and the water lines and the cemetery, the abandoned tunnels were open, empty, ventilated, waiting. Nobody thought about them. The mines were closed. The entrances were boarded up or fenced off. Children were told not to play near the old shafts, and mostly they listened, and the town went about the business of being a small American town in the early 1960s. Friday night football, Sunday morning mass at 4 different churches, the Oddfellows Lodge on Locust Avenue, the post office, the gas station, the municipal building where 5 volunteer council members met on the second Tuesday of every month to discuss potholes and zoning, and the annual Memorial Day parade. One of the recurring items on the council agenda was the town dump. Centralia did not have a formal landfill. What it had was an abandoned strip mine pit on the eastern edge of town, near the Oddfellows Cemetery. The pit was roughly 75 feet deep, open to the air, and for years residents had been throwing their garbage into it. Old furniture, food waste, broken appliances, the usual accumulation of a small town that could not afford regular hauling service. The pit was not lined. The pit was not engineered. The pit was a hole in the ground where coal had once been extracted, and at the bottom of that hole, exposed coal seams were visible. Anyone who looked could see them. Black veins in the rock wall, glistening when it rained. In the spring of 1962, the state of Pennsylvania sent notice to municipalities across the anthracite region. The notice said that open dumps were a health hazard and needed to be cleaned up before Memorial Day. The notice was routine. It went out every year. Most towns ignored it. Some burned their garbage to reduce the volume, then covered the ash with dirt. This was standard practice. It had been done dozens of times in dozens of towns without incident. On May 27th, the Centralia Council hired 5 volunteer firefighters to set a controlled burn in the strip mine pit. The procedure was simple: light the garbage, let it burn down, come back the next day, douse the remains, cover with dirt. Done. The 5 men arrived in the early afternoon. They lit the trash. The garbage caught easily. The men watched for a while, then left. This is the part of the story where every account diverges. What is known is that the fire was not fully extinguished. What is disputed is whether the firefighters returned the following day or not. Some accounts say they came back and sprayed water on the remains. Others say they did not. What no one disputes is that by early June, something was wrong. A sanitation worker named Charles Gasper noticed it first. He was inspecting the pit on a routine visit when he saw that the exposed coal seam on the eastern wall of the pit was glowing. Not smouldering, not smoking, glowing. The coal itself was incandescent, orange-red beneath a skin of ash, and the heat was intense enough that he could feel it on his face from 15 feet away. Charles Gasper reported what he saw to the Borough Council. The council discussed it at their next meeting. The minutes of that meeting, which still exist in the Columbia County Archives, record the following decision. The council voted to pour water on the exposed seam from the surface. The volunteer fire company was called. They brought a truck. They sprayed water into the pit for several hours. The glow faded. The council noted the matter resolved. 2 weeks later, the glow was back. Brighter this time. And it had moved. The incandescence was no longer confined to the east wall of the pit. It had spread south toward the cemetery and down into the abandoned mine workings that connected to the bottom of the strip pit. The fire had found the tunnels, and here is the fact that would define the next 6 decades. The abandoned mine tunnels beneath Centralia were not sealed. They were not filled. They were not blocked. They were open passages, some of them 8 feet high and 12 feet wide, bored through solid coal, connected to other tunnels, which connected to other tunnels, which connected to mine shafts that ran for miles in every direction beneath the town, beneath the surrounding hillsides, beneath the neighboring borough of Burnsville, beneath forests and farms and roads that had no idea what was underneath them. The tunnels were a highway. The coal was the fuel. The air moving through the tunnels was the oxygen. And the fire, once it reached the tunnels, had everything it needed to burn forever. The council did not know this yet, not in the summer of 1962. What they knew was that the fire in the pit would not stay out, and they needed help. They called the Pennsylvania Department of Mines and Mineral Industries. An inspector named Gordon Smith arrived in August. He descended into the pit with a temperature probe and a gas detector. The readings he recorded were alarming. Carbon monoxide levels exceeded safe limits. The temperature at the coalface was over 1,000 degrees Fahrenheit. Gordon Smith filed a report. The report recommended immediate excavation of the burning material. Dig it out, remove it, smother what remains with incombustible fill. The estimated cost was roughly $30,000. The borough of Centralia did not have $30,000. The population was 1,100. The tax base was negligible. The council applied for state emergency funds. The application was filed in September of 1962. The state responded in 1963. Not with money, with a project. A small excavation was authorized. Workers dug a trench along the eastern perimeter of the fire zone, roughly 200 feet long and 25 feet deep. The theory was that the trench would act as a firebreak, cutting off the coal seam and starving the fire of fuel. The trench was too shallow. The fire was already deeper than 25 feet. It passed beneath the trench without slowing down. A second project was approved in 1965, a larger trench, deeper, wider. Workers began digging in the spring. By summer, They had excavated a significant volume of burning material. The temperatures were extreme. Equipment broke down. One bulldozer had its tires melt. Workers reported headaches and nausea from the gases. The project was halted in August when funding ran out. The fire continued to spread. A third project was proposed in 1967, a flushing operation. The plan was to drill boreholes into the mine tunnels ahead of the fire and pump a slurry of crucite ash and water into the passages to seal them off. Hundreds of boreholes were drilled. Thousands of gallons of slurry were pumped underground. The tunnels were too large. The slurry dispersed. Some of it hardened in the wrong places. Some of it flowed away from the fire entirely. The operation was declared partially successful. The fire was now beneath Locust Avenue. Between 1962 and 1978, local, state and federal agencies spent a combined total of roughly $3.5 million on various attempts to contain or extinguish the Centralia mine fire. None of them worked. Every project was designed to address the fire as it had been when the project was proposed, not as it would be by the time the project was funded, approved, and executed. By the time each solution arrived, the fire had already moved past it. This was the pattern. Propose, wait, fund, wait, execute, discover the fire is now somewhere else, propose again. And while the agencies proposed and waited, and funded and waited, the fire did what fire does. It burned. By the early 1970s, the effects were no longer confined to the strip mine pit. They were under the town itself. A gas station owner named John Coddington noticed it in 1969. He had a fuel storage tank buried beneath his station on South Locust Avenue. When he checked the temperature of the gasoline in the tank with a dipstick thermometer, the reading was 172 degrees Fahrenheit. Gasoline auto-ignites at around 500 degrees. His underground tank was a third of the way there. John Coddington reported this to the Borough Council and to the state. The gas station was eventually closed. No broader action was taken. By 1975, residents on the south side of town were reporting strange phenomena. Gardens that would not grow, tomato plants that turned yellow and died within days of planting, basement walls that were warm to the touch, a sulphurous smell that came and went, stronger on some days than others, strongest in the early morning when the air was still. Helen Womer lived on East Park Street. Her backyard had a small garden where she grew vegetables every summer. In the spring of 1976, she noticed steam rising from the soil. Not morning mist. Steam. Continuous, visible, rising from the dirt in thin white columns that smelled like rotten eggs. She called the borough office. A man came and took a reading with a handheld gas detector. The carbon monoxide level in her backyard was 4 times the safe limit for outdoor air. Helen Womer was told to keep her windows closed. Eva Moran lived 3 houses down from Helen Womer. Her basement had always been cool in summer and cold in winter. In 1977, the basement floor became warm. By 1978, it was hot. She could not walk on it barefoot. She called the state. An inspector came. He drilled a small hole through her basement floor and lowered a thermometer. The temperature, 6 inches below the concrete, was 320 degrees. Eva Moran was told the situation was being monitored. Thomas Larkin owned a house on North Paxton Street. In the winter of 1979, he was shoveling snow from his front steps when he noticed that the snow on his lawn was melting. Not from sunlight. The air temperature was 12 degrees. The snow was melting from below. He walked across his yard and the ground was warm through his boots. He went to his neighbour's yard. Cold. Normal. He went back to his own yard. Warm. Thomas Larkin wrote a letter to the governor of Pennsylvania. The letter was 4 pages. It described the heat, the smell, the dead garden, the headaches his children were having. He asked for relocation assistance. The letter was acknowledged. No assistance was provided. By 1979, the Pennsylvania Department of Environmental Resources had installed a network of monitoring boreholes throughout the town. Temperature and gas readings were taken weekly. The data showed what everyone already knew. The fire was spreading north and west, directly beneath the residential core of Centralia. Carbon monoxide and carbon dioxide levels in some areas exceeded safe limits for both indoor and outdoor exposure. A man named David DeCock was a reporter for the Shamokin News item, the regional newspaper. He began covering Centralia in 1979 and would continue for decades. DeCock later wrote 2 books about the fire. He interviewed hundreds of residents, officials, engineers and politicians. His reporting documented what was happening with a precision that no government report matched. DeCock described visiting homes where the wallpaper was peeling from walls that were warm to the touch. He described standing in backyards where the ground steamed and the air tasted metallic. He described conversations with state officials who acknowledged the danger but said the funding was not available. He described a town that was slowly realizing it was not going to be saved. And then the ground opened. February 14th, 1981. A Saturday. The temperature was in the low 20s. A 12-year-old boy named Todd Domboski was walking through his grandmother's backyard on South Locust Avenue. He had walked this yard hundreds of times. He knew every inch of it. The ground beneath his feet gave way without warning. A sinkhole opened, 4 feet wide, 150 feet deep. The hole filled instantly with hot steam and carbon monoxide. Todd fell in up to his armpits. His cousin, Eric Wolfgang, was nearby. Eric grabbed Todd's arms and held on. Todd could feel the heat below him. He could not see the bottom. The steam was thick and white, and the smell was sulfur. Eric pulled him out. The rescue took less than a minute. The hole remained, venting hot gas into the February air. When investigators measured the void beneath the opening, they found a cavern created by the fire's consumption of a coal pillar that had been supporting the ground above it. The temperature at the bottom exceeded 900 degrees. Todd Domboski was uninjured. He did not require hospitalization. He went home. He was 12 years old. The Domboski sinkhole changed everything. Not because it was the first sign of danger. There had been signs for 19 years. Not because it was the worst incident. Carbon monoxide had been seeping into homes for nearly a decade. It changed everything because a 12-year-old boy nearly fell into a burning hole in his grandmother's backyard, and the national media arrived the next day. ABC News, CBS, the New York Times, the Philadelphia Inquirer. Suddenly, Centralia was not a line item in a state environmental report. It was a story, a town on fire, a child who nearly died, a government that had spent 2 decades doing nothing effective. Within weeks of the Domboski incident, the United States Bureau of Mines conducted a comprehensive assessment. The results were published in a report that ran to several hundred pages. The conclusions were stark. The fire now covered an area of approximately 350 acres beneath and around the town. It was advancing along multiple coal seams simultaneously. The primary direction of spread was northward, toward the most densely populated section of Centralia. But the fire had also extended south toward Burnsville and east toward the old mine shafts near Route 61. The carbon monoxide levels in multiple residential areas exceeded federal safety standards for continuous exposure. The subsidence risk was classified as severe. Additional sinkholes were probable. The risk to human life was described as significant and increasing. And then the report addressed the cost. Option 1, total excavation, dig out all the burning coal, remove it, fill the voids, seal the mine workings. Estimated cost, $660 million. Duration, approximately 10 years. The report noted that this was the only option with a high probability of permanently extinguishing the fire. Option 2. Partial containment. Dig trenches around the most critical areas. Attempt to isolate the fire from the town. Estimated cost, $100 to $200 million. Duration, 5 to 7 years. The report noted that this option had a moderate probability of protecting the town, but would not extinguish the fire, which would continue to burn in the surrounding coalfields indefinitely. Option 3. Relocation. Buy the properties, move the residents, abandon the town. Estimated cost, $42 million. Duration, 2 to 3 years. The report noted that this option would not address the fire at all, but would eliminate the risk to human life. $660 million, or $42 million. The math was not complicated. The decision was not agonized over. It was not debated in Congress. It was not the subject of a national referendum. It was a calculation. The kind of calculation that governments make every day, in every country, about every town that costs more to save than to erase. In 1983, the United States Congress allocated $42 million for the voluntary relocation of Centralia residents. The program was administered by the Pennsylvania Department of Community Affairs. Residents were offered fair market value for their homes, plus a relocation allowance. The offers ranged from roughly $15,000 to $30,000 per property, depending on size and condition. Most residents accepted. They did not have a choice that felt like a choice. The ground was warm, the air was toxic, the sinkholes were unpredictable. Their children were breathing carbon monoxide. Their property values were zero. No one would buy a house in Centralia. No bank would issue a mortgage. No insurance company would write a policy. The town was already dead. The relocation program was an obituary. But not everyone left. A small group of residents refused to go. They had been born in Centralia. Their parents had been born in Centralia. Their grandparents were buried in the Oddfellows Cemetery, which was itself now undermined by the fire. They did not trust the government's assessment. Some believed the fire was exaggerated. Some believed it could still be contained if the money were spent. Some simply refused to be moved. The most prominent among them was a woman named Lamar Mervine. She had lived in Centralia her entire life. Her house was on Locust Avenue, directly above the fire zone. She was offered $23,000 for a property her family had owned for 3 generations. She refused. She said the offer was an insult. She said the government was stealing her town. John Lokaitis was another holdout, a lifelong resident. He said the government had spent 20 years failing to fix the problem and was now punishing the residents for its own incompetence. He pointed to the $3.5 million spent on failed containment projects and asked why those contracts had been awarded to firms that clearly could not do the work. Nobody answered. By 1990, the relocation was largely complete. The population had dropped from 1,100 to approximately 63. The empty houses were demolished. The lots were cleared. Streets that had once been lined with homes and storefronts were now empty lanes leading nowhere, bordered by vacant lots where foundations had been removed and the earth was covered with grass that grew strangely green in winter because the ground was heated from below. The churches were closed. The schools were closed. The post office was closed. The Oddfellows Lodge was demolished. The gas stations were gone. Route 61, the main highway through town, had been closed since 1993 because the road surface had buckled and cracked from the heat below. A bypass was built around the town. Drivers on the bypass could see the steam rising from the hillside, but most did not know what they were looking at. In 1992, the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania invoked eminent domain against the remaining holdouts. The state claimed ownership of the properties on grounds of public safety. The holdouts sued. The case went through multiple courts over the next decade. In 2009, the last legal challenge was denied. The remaining residents were given a lifetime tenancy agreement. They could stay until they died or chose to leave, but they could not pass the properties to heirs. In 2002, the United States Postal Service revoked Centralia's zip code. The number had been 17927. It was reassigned. On official maps, Centralia ceased to exist as a municipality. The borough was not dissolved. It was simply emptied. The legal entity remained. The people did not. By 2010, the population was approximately 10. By 2013, it was 7. The 7 remaining residents lived in houses surrounded by nothing. Their neighbors were empty lots. Their streets were cracked and steaming. The nearest grocery store was in Ashland, 8 miles away. The nearest hospital was in Danville, 26 miles away. They stayed. The fire stayed too. As of this recording, the Centralia mine fire has been burning continuously for 62 years. It has consumed an area that extends well beyond the original town boundaries. The Pennsylvania Department of Environmental Protection continues to monitor gas levels and surface temperatures through a network of boreholes and sensors. The data is collected quarterly. The reports are filed. The fire is noted as active. The current estimates suggest that the fire has access to sufficient coal reserves to continue burning for at least 250 more years. Some geologists have suggested the figure could be higher. The anthracite seams beneath the region are thick, extensive, and interconnected. The fire will burn until the fuel is exhausted, and the fuel will not be exhausted in any lifetime that matters to anyone currently alive. The total amount spent on the Centralia mine fire by local, state, and federal agencies between 1962 and 2020 is estimated at over $140 million. This figure includes the original containment attempts, the relocation program, the ongoing monitoring, the highway rerouting, the legal proceedings, and the administrative costs associated with managing the depopulation of an American town. $660 million would have put the fire out. $140 million managed the consequences of not putting it out. And the fire is still burning. This is the arithmetic that Blackwell keeps returning to. Not because the numbers are complicated, they are simple. That is the point. The numbers were always simple. Every engineer who looked at the fire in the 1960s said the same thing. Dig it out now. It will cost money. It will cost less money now than it will cost later. And if you do not dig it out now, you will not be able to dig it out at all. They were right about all of it. The dig it out now option was $30,000 in 1962. By 1965, it was $200,000. By 1969, it was several million. By 1979, it was tens of millions. By 1983, it was $660 million. The cost of doing nothing grew exponentially, while the cost of doing something grew faster than any budget cycle could absorb. This is the pattern. Blackwell has seen it before. Blackwell will see it again. The pattern is not unique to Centralia. The pattern is not unique to coal fires, or Pennsylvania, or the 1960s. The pattern is the same everywhere the mathematics of negligence compound. A problem is identified. The problem is small. The cost of fixing the problem is small. The problem is not fixed because the cost, though small, is not zero. And not zero is harder to authorize than zero. The problem grows. A new assessment is commissioned. The cost has increased. The new cost is harder to authorize than the old cost. the problem grows further. Another assessment, another increase. At some point, the cost of fixing the problem exceeds the cost of abandoning whatever the problem is destroying. At that point, the decision is made. Not to fix the problem, to abandon. The mine fire beneath Centralia was not a natural disaster. It was not an act of God. It was not unpredictable or unpreventable or unavoidable. It was a trash fire in a dump that was built on top of exposed coal in a pit connected to unsealed mine tunnels. Every element of the catastrophe was known. Every element was documented. Every element could have been addressed. The dump could have been relocated before anyone lit a match. The mine openings could have been sealed when the mines closed. The fire could have been excavated in 1962 for $30,000. The trenches could have been dug deeper. The boreholes could have been drilled in the right places. The funding could have been approved faster. The relocations could have started sooner. The town could have been saved. None of that happened. What happened instead was a series of decisions, each of which was rational in isolation and catastrophic in sequence. Every decision-maker chose the cheapest available option at the moment the decision was required. Every cheapest option was insufficient, and every insufficient option made the next decision more expensive, which made the next cheapest option even more insufficient, which made the next decision more expensive, in a spiral that ended with a town being erased from the map. Gordon Smith, the mine inspector who filed the first report in 1962, recommended immediate excavation. His recommendation was not followed because $30,000 was not available in the borough budget. The state was asked for help. The state took a year to respond. When the state responded, the fire was no longer a $30,000 problem. The engineers who designed the first trench in 1963 said it needed to be deeper. They were overruled by budget constraints. The trench was dug to the depth the budget allowed. The fire passed beneath it. The engineers who proposed the flushing operation in 1967 said it would require a larger volume of slurry than was being provided. They were told to work with what they had. They worked with what they had. The fire continued. David de Kock, the reporter, documented dozens of instances where residents contacted state and federal officials with specific complaints about gas levels, ground temperatures, and health effects. The complaints were recorded. Many were acknowledged. Few resulted in action. Helen Womer was told to keep her windows closed. Eva Moran was told the situation was being monitored. Thomas Larkin wrote a 4-page letter to the governor and received an acknowledgement. Todd Domboski nearly fell into a burning sinkhole in his grandmother's backyard, and within 2 years the entire town was condemned. The gap between the first warning and the first effective action was 21 years. Centralia is not the only coal fire burning in the world today. It is not even the only coal fire burning in Pennsylvania. Coal seam fires are active in India, China, Indonesia, South Africa, and Australia. The Burning Mountain in New South Wales, Australia, has been burning for an estimated 6,000 years. The coal fires in Jharia, India, have displaced hundreds of thousands of people. The fires in Xinjiang, China, consume an estimated 10 million tons of coal per year. Most of these fires started the same way. Human activity exposed a coal seam. The coal ignited. The fire reached underground workings or natural fractures. Once underground, the fire became self-sustaining. Once self-sustaining, the fire became permanent on any human timescale. And in almost every case, the response followed the same pattern that Centralia established. Delay, underfund, underestimate, relocate, forget. Centralia still appears on some maps. If you drive there today, you will find Route 61, the old highway, still closed. The asphalt has buckled into waves. Graffiti covers the surface for nearly a mile. Steam rises from the cracks on cold mornings. The surrounding forest is strangely lush for a region with harsh winters because the ground is heated from below. A handful of houses remain. As of the most recent reports, fewer than 5 permanent residents still live within the borough limits. They are elderly. They have been told for decades that the air they breathe is harmful and the ground beneath their homes is unstable. They have stayed because leaving would mean admitting that the place where they were born no longer exists, and they are not ready to admit that. The fire is not ready to stop burning. Neither side will yield. The difference is that the fire has 250 years of fuel. The residents do not. The Oddfellows Cemetery sits on the hillside above what used to be South Locust Avenue. The headstones date back to the 1870s. Some of the graves are more than a century old. The ground beneath the cemetery has been monitored since the 1980s. The temperatures are elevated. The fire has not yet reached the cemetery directly, but the thermal plume extends beneath the southern boundary. The dead of Centralia rest above a slow furnace that is working its way toward them with the patience of geology. No one has proposed relocating the graves. The cost has not been calculated. Or perhaps it has been calculated, and the number was filed in the same drawer as every other number associated with this town. The drawer where costs go when they exceed the value assigned to what they would protect. There is a phrase in municipal budgeting. It is not written in any textbook, but every budget officer knows it. The phrase is, below the threshold of intervention. It means the problem is real, the damage is real, the suffering is real, but the cost of addressing it exceeds the political and financial willingness to act. Below the threshold of intervention does not mean below the threshold of pain. It means below the threshold of caring enough to pay. Centralia was below the threshold of intervention for 21 years. 1,100 people, 4 churches, a post office, a cemetery. An entire geography of human life exposed to toxic gas, collapsing ground, and a fire that everyone knew was there and everyone knew was growing. Below the threshold, for 21 years, until a 12-year-old boy fell into a hole in his grandmother's backyard and a camera crew from ABC showed up the next morning. That is the part Blackwell wants you to hold in your mind, not the fire. The fire is geology. The fire does not make decisions. The fire does not calculate. The fire simply burns because it has fuel and oxygen and heat, and those 3 things are present, and so the fire continues. The fire is not the villain of this story. The villain of this story is the spreadsheet. The spreadsheet that said $30,000 was too much in 1962. The spreadsheet that said the trench only needed to be 25 feet deep. The spreadsheet that said partial flushing was adequate. The spreadsheet that said monitoring was a substitute for action. The spreadsheet that compared 660 million to 42 million and chose 42 million. The spreadsheet that assigned a dollar value to a town and decided the town was worth less than the cost of saving it. Every line on that spreadsheet was correct. Every calculation was accurate. Every decision was rational. And the result of all that correctness and accuracy and rationality is a town that no longer exists, a fire that will burn for centuries, $140 million spent on managing a disaster that could have been prevented for $30,000, and a road sign in central Pennsylvania that says population 0 while the ground beneath it exhales. The ground is still warm. It will be warm long after everyone who remembers Centralia is gone, long after the last headstone in the Oddfellows Cemetery has crumbled, long after the bypass highway has been repaved and repaved again, and the drivers passing through have forgotten that there was ever a town here at all. The fire will still be burning, patient, indifferent, fed. 250 years of fuel, give or take. Centralia is not the only town that was erased because the math said erasing was cheaper than saving. It is not the only infrastructure failure that compounded because early intervention was denied. It is not the only place where the gap between the first warning and the first effective action was measured in decades. Next time, Blackwell examined something smaller, a ship. Everyone knew it would sink. The inspectors knew, the engineers knew, the crew knew. But the tickets were cheap, and the route was short, and the math said it was fine. The math is never fine.